Right, here we are again on day whatever it is of the Land-Rover rebuild. This is still the chassis driver's side, and you can see down here I've had to actually disconnect the axle to get around this bit. Basically now from here, right at the end, near the end of the dumb irons, all the way to here, there's nothing underneath. The bottom I've had to take out completely. So that's completely hollow all the way up. So rather than just patch over it like everyone else has done, what I've done is actually cut it out. So I've cut out all that rotten bit all the way up. So that's now just a massive void. So I've now got to obviously put something in there. So I've been cutting out the plate which I'm using, which is about 2.5 mil, I think this is, or thereabouts. So it's just the right thickness. And what I'm going to do is do it in sections, because it's too much of a curve to try and do it in one. This stuff's not particularly malleable. So this section here is going to go up like that, and I'm going to clamp it in and drag it into place, tack weld it and then seam weld it. Now what I've done to save myself some grief on this one is I've made this plate a 1/4 inch bigger than the actual width of the chassis, and the reason I've done that is that there's going to be an eighth, the plan is there'll be an eighth of this plate hanging over on each side. So that means when I weld it, the weld puddle will be going, I'll be welding down at an angle like that instead of having to weld it from underneath. So this seam here I'll be able to weld at that sort of angle, which will be tons easier, and make a nice solid joint out of it. Well, that's the plan anyway. So whilst I was dismantling that, I found another split. This split is actually in a repair plate. These plates here I put on many years ago, but they're solid enough that I'm actually going to leave those plates in. These bits here were the first ones I started with, so that needs sorting out. Around here, this where the suspension bush goes is in pretty bad condition, and I made a decision many years ago. I fell for the marketing hype on poly bushes, and I spent ages, vaguely remember now, spent ages taking this one out, this chassis bush out, which was actually fine, didn't need to come out at all, and putting the poly bush in instead. The other side was so much strength I just left it. So I've now actually had to take the rubber one out the other side because it's knackered. But this one, the poly bush that was in here, when I came to take it out this time round, it's in fairly terrible condition, and it really gripped well onto the chassis. It doesn't look like it survived all that well. So there's questionable benefits in poly brushes. I certainly wouldn't ever again. I mean, I had a Range Rover at a similar sort of period, and I took all the suspension brushes out and replaced them with poly brushes. I wouldn't bother doing that again. There's just not enough benefit in it. Right, so anyway, back to the plate. Let's get this on, clamped up, and do some welding. Straightening block is just a 56 pound weight, an old-fashioned weighing scale, I suppose. And with all the corners all smoothed off and radiused off nicely. And then you lay the piece of metal using a copper hammer. The copper hammer doesn't put dinks in it, unlike a steel one. And this is how I cold forge curves into metal. So working cold, you've got a consistent stiffness throughout the material. And now I'm going to finish off the bulkhead here. So I've made some repair panels for these big holes here. That one's going to go there. So I've just about done all the welding on the bulkhead, and I just wanted to show you some might look like subpar welding. The reason I'm showing you this is it doesn't really matter if you're a good welder or not. Sometimes it's not pretty welding, but here all the welding that looks really lumpy, it's all penetrating properly and it's all actually fusing two bits of metal together, which is the key thing. So all the duff welding that I've knocked off from previous efforts is it just hasn't adhered, it's just sat on the top. So this welding, although it doesn't look nice, actually does go right through. So as long as you've managed to achieve that, you can then just sand it all back, flush, and everything will be great. So this is a situation in which nice welding will give you less grinding, but it's not essential for it to look pretty. When you've got thicker metal to play with, like on the chassis, it's much easier to do a clean, nice looking bead of weld. But here I've just pulsed it in, but it'll be fine. Once it's all sanded back, that'll be lovely. So, I've got a fair bit to do. I've got this lot to do over there. I'll crack on. Right, that's the first bit of sanding done. Now on this, different areas need different treatments really. So here, where I've put in this new panel and I've sanded back the old dodgy welding down here, this is going to be painted and then this is going to be covered in bitumen and maybe even soundproofing. So there's no need to go overboard on this bit. This bit here is going to be underneath the bonnet. That's the bonnet sits on top of this bit, and there's the bonnet hinge. So again, this doesn't need to be super duper, but it needs to be cleaned up on the edges there where I've let it in. That needs to be a continuous bit there. That's almost there, that bit. And on the other side, on this corner, we've got some bits that will actually be seen. So again, this is the hinge. It won't be seen by much, but this bit here will all be seen. And this has got quite a bit of work to be done on it. So here I've sanded it back, but the actual panel that it's on isn't particularly flat. So what I'm going to do on all of it, but particularly on this bit now, is put lashings of red oxide primer on there. And then I'm going to sand back the primer using a random orbit sander, which is nice and flat. So unlike the sanding disc, which is on the angle grinder, the random orbit sander is flat, and that will take off the high spots and leave the paint in the low spots, and that will show me whether I need to do any more welding on this or whether I can get away with just doing a skim of filler and more primer and so forth. So it used to be the case that this was called red lead, and it actually had lead in it. And it was a really good protective paint, but that's no longer the case. This has got zinc phosphate in it, which is still protective. I don't think it's quite as protective as red lead used to be. So now if you see this anti-corrosive primer comes in, well, I've got it in black, white, grey and red oxide. It's all exactly the same stuff nowadays, it's just a different pigment in it. So it used to be red because it had the lead oxide. I'm looking forward to actually painting the chassis, which we should be able to do today or tomorrow. And with that, you see I've just done loads of the red oxide primer on there, and then I'm going to cover it with lots of bitumen paint for two reasons, well, for several reasons. I've done quite a bit of research into this, and it's nice. The bitumen has got some give to it, it sticks really well, and it's dirt cheap. It's also made of oil, which, considering how much oil splurges around a Land-Rover, is great. That'll just merge with it and give a even more protective coating. Wondering where all the wax oil had gone that I pumped into the chassis 2 years ago. I think I found it. It's all sat down here. Every time I'm trying to weld upside down, it's igniting, and that's what all this smoke's about. I must say it's very nice to be able to work on a vehicle and not worry about setting fire to the carpets, or burning out the alternator, or blowing up the fuel tank, or anything like that, because none of those things are on here.